Just a heads up for you wonderful people, this episode was pre-recorded due to our Keep It 100 golf tournament currently going on. This is a special edition of Take That for Data with Steven and Gerald, and since it was recorded early, there is a little bit of an outdated conversation at the end about Frank Vogel and his job security. That being said, a lot of stuff surrounding the conversation is still very, very good discussion, so we're going to keep it in here, so enjoy this very special edition of Take That for Data.
Hank McCoy.
Welcome to Take That for Data, a special episode of the PHNX Sun Show. And shout out to OG's Brands, the official sponsor of Flavoring Fridays. OG's is not your average cannabis-infused gummy. They absolutely knock it out of the park when it comes to flavor, and the effects of their gummies are a total slam dunk too. Head on over to ogsbrands.com to see their full lineup, including their two newest gummies, the OG's Naturals and the Big OG's, and find out where you can purchase. I am your host, Gerald Bourguet, and joined, as always, by my esteemed co-host, Steven Pridgeon-Garner. Steven, how you doing today?
Man, I'm blessed. I wish we had some live basketball to speak about, but I want a lot for that to affect my my energy. It's still very much playoff basketball. There's just no Phoenix Suns to speak on in that regard. So how about you, though? How you doing?
I'm doing okay. I was not expecting the offseason to be here so quickly. I think we can both agree on that. I enjoy the offseason, don't get me wrong, but in its due course and time, I don't think we were expecting it to be here so soon. So now we have already turned to the state of the Suns, what's wrong with the Suns, what needs to change with the Suns. And so this whole episode, we're going to be kind of doing a postmortem on what went wrong with Phoenix in that first round series. We're also going to be taking a look ahead to things that we might change with the roster, with the team, and how to build around the big three. But let's get started with our first topic here in terms of what went wrong in this Timberwolves series. And Steven, I've very much been on the train that I think, especially now with what the Timberwolves are doing to the Nuggets, that series was less about what was wrong with the Suns and maybe a little bit more about what was right with the Timberwolves. But I want to get your perspective on this now that the 4-game sweep is complete. What stood out to you in that series?
Yeah, we recorded, one episode while the series was live. And I think we did a rather thorough job in making sure that fans and any people that support or even listen to our podcast were very much aware that a lot of the things that we were seeing was because Minnesota was so good rather than the Suns being bad. Obviously, there was plenty of Suns being bad in that, but we made sure we prefaced with emphasis that Minnesota was just that much better. So I know you said what you said, but I feel like we, especially you, with the intro of the last episode, did a great job with that. But just kind of looking at that series, I think what stood out most to me, naturally, like we just got done speaking to, was the Minnesota Timberwolves. Rudy Gobert and Karl-Anthony Towns in particular. I talked about those two being at the top of the list of the Where's Waldos that the Suns will be trying to look for with their offense and mismatch hunting and general movement. Those two look better in space defending than I've seen either one of those two look over the course of their entire career. And when you talk about time on task, especially the urgency that comes with that in a playoff context, those two did quite literally. I don't think they could defend any better than they did in that series. And they did so consistently, executing the game plan, whether they were in drop covers, whether they were switching, whether they were hedging and recovering. They were just up to task time after time after time. And they were able to get up good contests. And that's quite literally, as Steve Jones of the dunker spot always says, you have to figure out one thing and your opponent has to figure out how to take that thing away. They figured out what covers they wanted to consistently stay in with the Suns' big three, and they were able to execute that. The Suns couldn't figure out how to counterpunch to that, and the series was quickly over in the sweep. So I think that's where I would start before anything else. I'm curious what kind of stood out most to you over the course of that series, and just kind of what your general vibes are from it.
Yeah, I agree. I think it was very much a case of like there were definitely things that the Suns wanted to exploit that they did a great job of that in the regular season matchups. But I almost felt like they got rope-a-doped in a way because the team that we saw from Minnesota in that last game of the regular season defensively was not the same team that we saw in those 4 games. I mean, talk about turning it on and flipping a switch, whatever you want to call it. Like their defense, I mean, and they did it again the other night against Denver in game 2, and probably one of the best first half defensive performances I've seen in any NBA playoff game. Like they are just turning off everybody's water. And to your point, like it felt like the Suns tried to get Gobert on an island. They tried to put Towns in actions and make him work defensively. And those guys held their own. Like Gobert, you mentioned it, a lot in the past has been made of in the playoffs. Can he, stay on the floor? Can small ball run him off the floor? Can you spread him out and attack him on the perimeter? And the Suns tried to do that, and they just could not take advantage of it because Gobert was so good on that front. Towns held his own on that front. Naz Reid, like they had so much size and length and so much activity defensively and harassing the ball handlers that it just didn't matter. And I think they looked for pigeons elsewhere too. Like they were like in the regular season, Grayson Allen did a great job of driving against Mike Conley whenever they tried to stick Conley on him. And he was bodying Conley, getting into the lane, floaters, layups, all this stuff. Grayson Allen, I know this 2 sprained ankles obviously play a role in this, but in his action when he was on the court, he was basically a non-factor for those first 2 games. And he was kind of the guy that I was looking at, like having him in the starting lineup, you need to take advantage of the shooting, the spacing, the floor spacing that he provides out there. And it just didn't feel like they could do that. And, we could talk all day about Jaden McDaniels, the defense he played on Devin Booker, the defense he and Nickeil Alexander-Walker have continued to play on Jamal Murray in the second round. Like they have just taken this defense to otherworldly, historically good levels in the playoffs. And again, what the Timberwolves are doing to the Nuggets shouldn't distract from the Suns and their issues. But it does make me feel slightly better to see them doing this to the defending champs and completely clamping down on an offense that has, championship experience and way more continuity together.
Yeah, I think you made a ton of excellent points, and it was obviously well said per usual. I think, especially like if for anybody that plays football or is an observer of football, there's something that's synonymous between football and basketball, especially when speaking to a playoff context. And the one entity of a team that coaches and GMs and people that analyze the game always say is that a defense is going to travel. Now, how many teams actually have defense baked into their identity in this era of the NBA? You could probably count on a couple of fingers. And even specific to the playoff context, you can really dwindle that down to a couple of fingers. At the chiefest of the top of the fingers you're going to use is going to be the Minnesota Timberwolves. So naturally, you see them get into a playoff setting where you don't have to worry about back-to-backs and you don't have to worry about teams having a travel advantage against you with the rigors that come with the 82-game regular season series. And you're able to focus on one particular opponent and their tendencies and their habits and how to exploit those things. That's a match made in heaven for a team that literally infuses all of their investments into the defensive side of the floor and allows for that to set the tone and allow for them to get into anything that they want to do on the offensive side. And that's pretty much where they won the series. They were able to dictate terms the entire series. They stamped their identity early and often. And, we saw the result that we saw. But if I'm kind of looking at things from a Suns perspective and just where they left more to be desired, I think where sooner can you start than with the offensive process? They just got sent off script entirely too much. They ended up having to play chasing from behind far too often over the course of the series. And though they're more than capable of doing so, which we saw at multiple times in the regular season, that's not something that's sustainable to consistently play from behind over the course of a series in a playoff context. And especially when you have a team that is going to stifle whatever it is you want to do over the course of a game with their defense. So I think they just left a lot of food on the table in their offensive process. And I think most of that kind of just starts with the general approach to the series. Now, you can say that's the players executing. You can say that's the game plan that the coaches had. You can say it's a healthy blend of both. But I think there's no name that can be absolved from the shortcomings that they saw in this series. And I feel like looking at it through any other lens would be showing some type of bias or favoritism in some capacity.
Yeah, there really wasn't anybody in this series that I can look at and say, well, at least they had a good series. Like there were a couple guys that had a good game or two, but nobody had a good series in this. And again, a lot of that goes back to the Minnesota defense. But offensively, process-wise, it felt like to me, and I think we talked about this after the first 2 games, it felt like they were leaving a lot on the table because their process was good early in the game, but they weren't hitting shots that you need your big three to make, you need your other guys to make. And it felt like when those shots stopped falling, they kind of veered away from the process, or they lost faith in it, and they kind of started doing, going off the rails a little bit. And you cannot do that against a defense that's this good on an individual one-on-one basis and a team concept basis. So I'm curious on what you saw on that front, because for me, like, it felt like, KD doing a lot of one-on-one, Devin Booker struggling with the length and physicality that McDaniels and Nickeil Alexander-Walker were putting on him until, they both kind of went off in game 4. And we could talk about the small ball component of that, because I think that did free some things up. But process wise, like, did it kind of feel that way to you in terms of like, man, we're running good stuff in this first quarter, but we don't have the score that we need to have to reflect how good we've been offensively?
Yeah, I think that's a great point that you just made. And I think that aligns with where my mind is as well. One thing about the playoffs, I think I mentioned it on the last episode we recorded, it's going to test your habits, the good and the bad, and it's going to expose the bad, and that's going to outshine the good when you're especially at a deficit in a series. I feel like over the course of the regular season, we saw spurts where the Suns were running a beautiful motion movement offense of the player in the ball, getting east and west movement, ultimately leading to north and south penetration into a paint touch, into a pass, if not 2 or 3 passes, that's a wide open 3-point opportunity, or for somebody to play into a high shot quality attempt at the basket. The issue with the Suns was that process wise, even if you're so embedded in your habits in a positive way that you have a system and everybody's bought in, regardless of the result, your default is going to be going back to doing what has proven to work. And what they didn't do, and which is my fault, what they did in the regular season quite often, things didn't work. You result to ISO basketball. And again, when we talk about a team that has a defense, the capacity that the Minnesota Timberwolves does, if you revert to isolation basketball, naturally you have 3 Hall of Famers on your team, 3 of the best shot makers in the league. You're going to get away with some of it. But they're better knowing the fact that you're not going to get away with that for 4 games to win an entire series. And that gambit that they had really doesn't even seem like a gambit, because they were able to obviously make that happen to the extent of winning 4 in a row and sweeping that series away. So I think that's kind of what was the biggest takeaway for me was process-wise. And I think the other big thing, they didn't bring the proverbial punch to the fight that they needed to in a physicality standpoint. I know, like, the Golden State Warriors, I think, are maybe the best, most recent example of having a motion movement offense in a playoff context that is actually impactful once the team obviously knows what sets you're running. The only way you can get away with continuing to run sets and run actions that your opponent knows is by first doing so with tempo and pace, which was something that was completely off the rails for the Suns this series and for a majority of it. But the other thing is meeting some of the defensive physicality with offensive physicality. You can hit first when you're in the post and you're setting up for a post touch if you're Yusuf Nurkic, trying to get into split actions or high split actions, or if you're Kevin Durant fighting for a mid-post positioning to ultimately get into isolation or play off of a double team. If you're getting pushed off your mark so consistently, again, you're being dictated to by the defense where you're running your offense from. And even in a more specific context with the Suns in their heavy pick and roll attack, if those screens that are being set are not sharp, Jaden McDaniels is slithering through, Mike Conley, Nickeil Alexander-Walker, the list goes on. They just didn't have that requisite level of physicality, even just within the offensive perspective that they needed to bring as a punch to the series. And then I think we'll talk about the defense a little bit as well, but the way that they were bullied by their smalls on the offensive glass for the Minnesota Timberwolves, that's just a non-negotiable in the playoff context. You can't get rebounds, you can't win in that series, and that's what we saw.
Yeah, no, I'm glad you pointed some of those things out, because the size, the physicality were big factors for me in this series. It just felt like they were overwhelmed in both of those areas. Heading into the series, I thought this was a matchup where Yusuf Nurkic could stay on the floor. I think we both agreed he stood a better chance of staying on the floor against this dual big lineup than, a team like OKC who can spread you out and drive, or who's the other? The Nuggets were a good matchup too, but like a Dallas or a Clippers, those are teams that you might struggle to stay on the floor with what they're going to make you do defensively. I thought this was a good matchup for him, but the screen setting that we were used to from Nurk all season long, it felt like the Timberwolves did a great job of navigating those screens And that took a lot of what Nurk did off the floor. The fact that he was getting bullied on the boards by Rudy Gobert, that just can't happen in this series. And there were so many other of those little indicators that it's like, where is the fight against this team? Because you're getting bullied in multiple facets here. So that was definitely disappointing. Before we move on, anything else that stood out in terms of like Suns problems? Because I know we were both in agreement that this was mostly a Timberwolves thing, but anything else that stood out to you from like for me, you got to get up more threes, and that kind of goes to the offensive process. But holy crap, you cannot be taking as few threes as they were taking in the modern NBA and expect to win against a defense like this.
Yeah, I think that would have been one of the things I would have spoke to, which is the 3-point shooting and the discrepancy between the two teams. If we mentioned going into the series that the Suns would be outshot by almost 7, if not closer to 8 3-point attempts a game, and Minnesota would be beating them by almost 3 makes per game from deep, we would have both said this series would be over in 5 or 6, and naturally it was done in 4. That's something, again, as a team that's offensively inclined, especially to the extent that the Suns are, non-negotiable in the series against a team that's had their fair share of struggles on the offensive side of the ball. So the best way for them to punch the Timberwolves would have been with their scoring, which naturally would have diminished the impact of their strength, which is their defense. It was a perfect clash in terms of styles, which obviously make fights, and the Suns just didn't bring theirs to the ultimate bout, and they got knocked out. And I think the other biggest thing I would have spoke to, outside of the 3-point shooting, just the size and the physicality that they brought, or they didn't bring rather, on the defensive side of the ball.
Yeah.
I mean, we know they had shortcomings in terms of process and being able to consistently nail rotations that you would need to in a playoff context. But I just don't think they should have been out physical to the extent that they were in that series. And that's excluding the front court. Obviously, Yusuf Nurkic is smaller in wingspan than Rudy Gobert and even Karl Anthony Towns, to be honest. So, he's going to be able to throw his body around a little bit, but just being at a deficit wingspan-wise is going to make things tough. But that's where you have to gang rebound. I think we heard Frank Vogel mention ad nauseum over the course of the season, especially in the playoffs, that gang rebounding was at near the top of things that they just had to do. They didn't have it. And I think some of that, again, comes from size, but also just a level of urgency and just a desire to want to. We've seen Devin Booker be an elite rebounder in a playoff series before, especially in the guard context. We've seen Kevin Durant do that. Bradley Beal hasn't been known for doing that in particular, but he's never come up shy in terms of the competitive gene and the competitive dynamic. That's quite literally what it comes down to in rebounding. You could be the most unathletic player. I mean, look at, no offense to Nurk, but Nurk is not the most athletic player, but how many 20-plus rebound games did he compile post-All-Star break? That's just a matter of will, and that's just a matter of urgency and how important is it to you as a collective. I don't think they had the requisite level in any of those capacities. And, we just saw them completely get, washed in a sense over the course of the series.
Yeah, that was disappointing to me because, like you said, and I don't mean to diminish some of the great rebounders in the game, because there is that kind of innate sense and ability to track the ball, get the ball, put the requisite physicality into it to free up that space. And there's a lot of technique that goes into that. But like at the end of the day, a lot of it is heart. And like you look at a guy like Josh Hart, like he is not overly athletic. He's not oversized. Look at how many rebounds he's grabbing for the Knicks, how many offensive boards and second chances he's providing. The Suns didn't have anybody that was coming in off the bench or in the starting lineup providing those same types of plays that can fire up a home crowd or demoralize a hostile crowd. Like they just didn't have that will that I think we are seeing a lot of these other teams have. And we're kind of wondering like, okay, how much of this is just the Timberwolves zapping their desire to compete, and how much of this is something that's innate and needs to be fixed in terms of bringing in new blood or whatever it is. But we'll get into that because I do want to talk about the state of the starting lineup, and that's definitely our next topic of conversation. But first, I do want to tell you guys about OGs. OGs has launched 2 new products made with live rosin and RSO, the OGs Naturals and the Big OGs. OGs Naturals are vegan gummies made with live rosin, available in a sweet clementine flavor. Meanwhile, the Big OGs gummy is a mega version of Peg's Raspberry Orange RSO, one of the company's most popular products. It's perforated into 10 slices, so you can slice it up and dice it up that way, each with 10 mg THC for a total of 100 mg THC. Like freshly squeezed juice, live rosin is created through a pressing process. The highest quality harvested cannabis is frozen and ultimately pressed to extract the all-natural live rosin oil. To learn more about OG's gummies and where you can find them, head on over to ogsbrands.com. Must be 21 plus to enjoy responsibly. I also want to tell you guys about BetMGM and their Grand Slam Jackpot promotion, which is every Friday, Saturday, and Sunday through the MLB season. So this weekend, you might want to get in on this. Introducing the MLB Grand Slam Jackpot, which is a weekly bet and get promotion. Place a $10 or more wager on any player to hit a home run every weekend. That's Friday, Saturday, and Sunday. And if the player hits a Grand Slam on that day, they can win the $50,000 daily prize or share the prize with every other winning bettor. So, for example, a customer bets on Aaron Judge to hit a home run on the 31st of July against Houston. If Judge hits a grand slam along with 9 other customers, each of you will take home $5,000 in cash in addition to your bet winnings. So how to get this offer in 4 easy steps: download the BetMGM Sportsbook app on iOS or Android, or you can visit betmgm.com. Sign up and deposit at least $10 into your BetMGM Sportsbook account. Place your first wager and receive up to $1,500 back in bonus bets if the bet loses. And if the bet does lose, your bonus bets will be available once the initial wager is settled. So sign up for BetMGM. Use bonus code PHNX. Place your first BetMGM Sportsbook wager through BetMGM Sportsbook mobile app for at least $10. You will receive up to $1,500 in bonus bets if the bet loses. Check out the show notes for full details. And now you can listen to Shane give the disclaimer.
Bonus bets expire in 7 days. One new customer offer only. Gambling problem? Call 1-800-GAMBLER. Available in the U.S. Call 877-8-HOPE-NY 467-369 New York. Call 1-800-327-5050 Massachusetts. 21 plus only. Please gamble responsibly. Call 1-800-NEXT-STEP Arizona. 1-800-BETS-OFF Iowa. 1-800-981-0023 Puerto Rico. First bet offer for new customers only. Subject to eligibility requirements. Bonus bets are non-withdrawable. In partnership with Kansas Crossing Casino and Hotel. See BetMGM.com for terms. U.S. promotional offers not available in New York, Nevada, North Carolina, Ontario, or Puerto Rico.
All right, Steven, let's talk about the state of the Suns starting lineup, because this is something that we had discussed multiple times. I feel like this is only our 7th episode, but I feel like we've talked about this on at least 3 or 4 episodes in terms of after the Suns added Royce O'Neal, you and I both wanted to see him in the starting lineup a little bit more often than we did down the stretch of the regular season. That didn't really happen. I think looking at the data here, Royce only played with Bradley Beal, Kevin Durant, Devin Booker, and Yusuf Nurkic for 37 minutes in the regular season. They were a -7 in those minutes. And that lack of experimentation, to me, came back to really haunt them in a series where Grayson Allen left game 1 in the 3rd quarter with an ankle injury, and then left game 2 early with another ankle injury, and they had to default to Royce O'Neal. And it felt like that lack of familiarity kind of hurt them, because in those 26 minutes of that lineup with Royce in Grayson's place, they were outscored by 24 points. So I'm curious what your thoughts are on the state of the Suns lineup, because you look at this, like the starting 5 is locked in contract-wise for next year. Maybe they trade somebody or whatever, but as of right now, they have all 5 of their normal starters under contract. And they're probably going to re-sign Royce O'Neal because there's literally no incentive to let him walk. You got to bring him back. Even if you don't think he can survive in a playoff series, you have to re-sign him as a second tax apron team, which I wrote about over at gophnx.com. If you are confused, I know not everyone is a salary cap expert, but there's no incentive to let him leave. So those 6 guys, you're probably bringing them back. So I want to get your thoughts. What is the state of the starting lineup, and does it need to change moving forward?
Yeah, I think you teed that up perfectly. I really do wish that we got to see more of Royce with the starting group, because I feel like the style of play that Grayson Allen obviously brings to the table that is extremely complementary to everything that the big 3 plus Nurkic do synergy wise and puzzle piece wise in terms of fitting together. I think it would be more impactful if that particular dynamic was like a secondary unit or a primary unit, but not the unit that you're using to set a tone with. Now, obviously, in certain matchups, like we talked about, his prowess as a shooter, his prowess in spacing, and how he has to be accounted for, the ways you can manipulate the chessboard with putting him a pass away, 2 passes away, or in the opposite corner of an action, and how he could be used as a screener, like all of those different features and things that come with Grayson Allen. I think they would be perfect if he was in a 6-man type of role. Quite honestly, I feel like if he was in that role for majority of the season, he would have been the sixth player of the year. Leading the league in three-point shooting, the just general impact that he had when he was on those heaters. Like, you don't have to take away from the minutes that he's getting, but I think it would be better if they were able to kind of have even the slightest bit more defense around all the offense that they have in that starting unit. They didn't see that. They didn't get those reps in, and naturally, unfortunately, by way of Grayson Allen's injury, they had to bank on that to be their starting lineup with Royce O'Neal in the playoffs, and we started to see some of the shortcomings of just that general unit just not having the level of chemistry that a team that's starting in a playoff context should have. And, we saw that work extremely against them. And I feel like going into next season, they have to be a little bit more organized with not having to use so many different starting lineups. Now, naturally, that includes players being healthy, but I think also having just a general template for what your starting lineup or desired starting lineup would be, and being able to just allow for that unit to play as much as possible would be important. Because then having the counterpunch with Grayson Allen to potentially close games against some opponents and just generally give a little bit more of a spark plug feel is more apt for the type of player that he is.
Yeah, and then let's put on our rose-colored glasses for a minute and explain to the people why the future is bright for the Suns. Brought to you by Shady Rays. Head to shadyrays.com and use our code PHNX at checkout, or 35% off polarized sunglasses. Steven, you touched on that in terms of like Grayson was the starter for most of the season, kind of because he had to be, like, because there were so many injuries, because he made sense off the top, because Keita Bates-Diop didn't really pan out into that guy. There were a lot of different reasons for that. Heading into next season, where you have like a certified guy who should challenge for that role, I think we heard Frank Vogel say a couple of times that like Grayson is their guy. He's their starter. He's been their starter for the whole season. Do you think, let's assume that Frank Vogel is back, do you think that a summer of looking at things through a different lens, of seeing the size discrepancy, of re-signing Royce O'Neal, do you think that changes that? Or do you think he kind of sticks with the default because that was kind of the only starting lineup that they were able to fall back on throughout the year?
Well, I think where I kind of go a different direction is I feel like Frank would be more inclined to remain with what's comfortable. Whereas if I was Frank, I would certainly look to shake things up some. You know what you got with this unit? They've got all the reps compiled. It wouldn't take anything to reinsert them should an emergency big red button need to get hit, or obviously you get into games where you're in the clutch and you want to go with something that's a little bit more offensive inclined to close a game versus the defensively inclined lineup. I think that's where you can use it, like I keep saying, as that counterpunch. I feel like that's how it'd be most impactful for him, as well as the pieces in that starting unit. I would love to see if, again, this is extremely contingent upon what they're able to net in terms of free agency and or potentially via trade, which is obviously never out of the question. They got their hands behind their back and handcuffs a little bit as far as movement goes and adding more talent. But if they could find a veteran minimum type of player that can come in, bridge that gap between everything that Royce O'Neal brings when he's with the starting unit and everything that Grayson Allen brings when he's in the starting unit, add a little bit more size, add even most chiefly more athleticism to infuse. I think a perfect example is seeing what the Dallas Mavericks did, not just with the trades that they made at the deadline, but they also brought in Derrick Jones Jr. Derrick Jones Jr. is a player that's certainly not without his own flaws, but they looked past, okay, we're not going to just pay attention to what he can't bring to the table. Let's pay attention to what he can bring to the table and how that impacts the players around us. They needed more athleticism, but how around everything that Luka Doncic and Kyrie Irving were doing, on the wing in particular, with size. What does Derrick Jones Jr. bring? Whether his three-point shot is off or whether he's able to get into movement sets or not, he has a level of athleticism that if they don't defend him well, is going to have to be accounted for. If you leave him for a second, he's not necessarily a spacer, but what is he good at? Cutting. And what is his cutting with that athleticism emphasize? His athleticism and ability to finish at the basket. How many times a game does he get an opportunity at a backdoor lob opportunity, whether it be off a bounce pass or if it's an actual alley-oop, and the type of energy that brings, and also dunks taking on a different type of impact on the playoff stage. Like those little things, I feel like is how the Suns front office should be assessing things going forward, not just looking at players' flaws and, okay, he can't play with us, but what can he bring to the table? Another thing with Derrick Jones Jr., he's not necessarily LeBron James or Chris Paul or Luka Doncic or Nikola Jokic IQ-wise, but he knows how to do his job. He knows how to get from point A to point B and execute a game plan. Those little things are extremely important, and I feel like that's the type of gold the Suns need to look to strike in free agency and add to this roster.
Yeah, no, I agree. I think if you have a way that you can bring in a little more size, a little more athleticism, particularly on the wing, if you can find an upgrade over Royce or Grayson in that starting lineup, like absolutely, that would be incredible. Like you mentioned, there will be difficulty in how you find that player and how you bring them here, because shy of getting a guy to take a very steep discount because you've only got the veteran minimum to offer in free agency, you're going to have to trade for them. And even with trades, like, we could get into the second tax apron stuff, but you can't bring back a single dollar more than what you're sending out in any trade. You can't combine multiple players that you're sending out to get a larger salary in return. So that's going to be tough. Over the coming weeks, you best believe we'll be diving into literally every single option possible for each one of the tradable contracts on the Suns right now. But it's going to be interesting because Jusuf Nurkic doesn't have a ton of value, but he's probably your best contract in terms of being able to trade him for one or two players who can come and contribute. So that's going to be tough. And I do think, like, we've been focusing a lot on the Grayson Allen, Royce O'Neal thing. I do think as good as Nurk was this year, and as much as he surprised me defensively by being better than I kind of expected, I don't know how you can look at the Suns' playoff run and look at their center rotation and think that, like, running it back with both or one of two of those guys is the answer. At the end of the day, you might not have the ability to go out and get an upgrade at center, but that option has to be explored, because I love Nurk, and Nurk, like I said, was better than I expected. But if he couldn't stay on the floor against the Timberwolves in a matchup that was generally more favorable, what's going to happen if the Suns get matched up with the Thunder or the Mavs or the Clippers in the first round next year? Like, it's not going to be good. You need a center who can stay on the floor defensively, who can finish around the basket, because Lord knows Nurk around the basket was an adventure this season. So as much as he brings the screen setting, the rebounding, the passing and the connector ability offensively, the flaws outweighed the strengths that he brought to the table in a big way in the playoffs.
Yep, I think you said that perfectly. And I think there are certainly options that we can either presume or that will literally be available for them in terms of trying to address the front court shortcomings and weaknesses. It's just a matter if they'll be able to execute it. But I do feel like maybe even more chiefly than the wing, especially if Frank Vogel is the coach that you're going to be rolling into next season with, you have to get him a rim protector. Obviously, you're not going to bring in Anthony Davis, but looking at the template, which was the defense that he ran in the 2020 season when he won the championship with the Lakers, spearheaded by a lot of that was the versatility that he had in Anthony Davis, in addition to the wing pieces that we just ran all the way through, him having Alex Caruso, Kentavious Caldwell-Pope, et cetera, et cetera. But before you can get to that piece, you have to get that front court established. And he had, Anthony Davis, he had Dwight Howard. Like Dwight Howard obviously wasn't 2013, 2012 Dwight, but he was still very much serviceable as a rebounder and as a defensive anchor and upholding any type of scheme he wanted to run. I think that's where the Suns have to get to. Maybe, like I said, even more chiefly than the wing, being able to have some type of, I think the Suns would greatly benefit from some type of vertical spacing. Yeah. Like whether like just spitballing names, I'm not saying that they're going to actually go get these players, but whether that's a youthful Nick Claxton that's a lot more rim running, he's a quicker, more fleet of foot type of guy that can get up above the rim, or if it's someone that's a little bit more to the ground now because of age, but can certainly still provide some vertical spacing, someone like Clint Capella. I think any side of that spectrum in terms of the size and athleticism, and naturally, if you're looking at those two players, you're seeing a sort of archetype being carved out that could greatly benefit from the pace that the Suns desire to play at, but also the things that Frank Vogel is going to demand from the front court defensively. I think you can start to see the picture of the type of player that they would probably hope to get. And then the other big thing I'll mention with Kevin Young being out of the picture now, with him accepting the opportunity to go coach at BYU, which big salute to him. Anytime a coach gets an upgrade and opportunity, I always salute that. Those opportunities are near impossible to come by. So you can say what you want about what happened this season and who was at fault, but I'm happy for him to have that opportunity. You have to figure out who's going to be the offensive-minded assistant coach. And if that center group can facilitate to the style of offense that coach is going to want to run. So they got a lot of things they have to consider. It's a laundry list of things, and I hope they have a laundry list of players that they can kind of look forward to trying to nab for the roster going into next season.
Yeah, I am very curious to see, to your point about the offensive assistant, now that Kevin Young is gone. I'm very interested to see what the coaching staff looks like beyond just Frank Vogel, because if you fire Frank Vogel, okay, you're probably starting from scratch or maybe retaining one or two guys, but most of those guys that you brought in were Vogel's guys anyway, so you're probably starting from scratch. But if you keep Frank Vogel, you need to fill that spot with somebody. Do you give Frank Vogel the free rein to bring somebody in when you've kind of been waffling over this week or trying to figure out if you want to even keep him? Do you once again do what you did last year where you kind of pigeonhole your own guy in there and basically signal to him like, look, we trust you and we want you to be the main guy, but also like if things go wrong, this is going to be our guy. Like that's a weird dynamic to navigate with a coaching staff. And for the record, I do think Vogel and Kevin Young navigated it about as well as you can, but there's just something inherently awkward about like, yeah, this guy that I was competing with for the main job is now my lead assistant. There's a give and take there that can be difficult to navigate. And I'm glad you brought up the archetypes of bigs that they're looking for, because man, it is a pity that DeAndre Ayton really didn't work out, because he checks a lot of those boxes in terms of what we're talking about. And that is not me saying that the Suns shouldn't have pulled the trigger on that trade. Both DA and the Suns needed a fresh start. I'm not trying to rewrite history here or go back on what I said. But like, man, if DA could have pulled it together and figured things out, it would have been interesting to see how he and Frank Vogel would have worked out, because you're right. Like Vogel went from having AD, Dwight Howard, and JaVale McGee in LA and winning a championship there to Yusuf Nurkic and Drew Eubanks. And like, that's hard. That's a hard thing to bridge. And the fact that the Suns were 13th in defensive rating, despite all the guys in and out of the lineup they had, I mean, people are saying that we didn't see the defense that Frank Vogel was supposed to be. I would counter, we saw it very clearly. It's just not, a top 5 mark like everyone wanted. So yeah, it's a pity DA didn't work out and that trade had to happen. But now you're kind of left with, okay, we need some sort of rim lob threat. We need someone who can set screens, who can collapse a defense with their gravity. Nurk brought none of that to the table. But anything else you want to share on the state of the starting lineup before we move on to our next topic?
Nothing in particular to the starting lineup. I did want to ask the question because something came to mind off the top of my head. The Suns do have a first-round draft pick this year, right?
They do. They have the number 22 overall pick, and they can either use that pick or it's trade eligible starting on draft night.
Got you. So with that in mind, I'm just thinking all of the trade stuff we talked about, naturally that pick would certainly be included because of the pieces that they would be sending out, trying to garner something more back. But I think for me, looking at that pick right now, you have to try to find yourself another Toumani Camara in the draft. But this time, obviously, keeping that asset close to the vest rather than using it to facilitate another trade down the line. I think that's another outlet, and that's the only reason I asked, just to make sure that I was speaking correctly. That 22nd pick is something that they can certainly use as a weapon to add to everything that we talked about, them trying to add more youthful exuberance and more athleticism. Quite literally, you don't get a better chance to do that than do the draft. Now, you can find yourself an athletic rolling big that fits the archetype of Nick Claxton or Clint Capella that you can develop with your player development program and with the G League team on the way as well. That's certainly an outlet to do so as well. But you can also find yourself a wing like Toumani, like I mentioned. There's options available for them to wiggle through, even with their second tax apron hamstringing that comes with that, trying to build a roster. But they just have to make sure they're exhausting everything, because it's slim pickings in terms of the maneuverability that they do have.
Yeah, absolutely. They do have that pick. Listening to Matt Ishbia and James Jones talk at their end of season availability, Their comments about we're not thinking about the 7th grader in 2031, a little worrisome if you're hoping that they hold on to that pick and draft somebody. But hopefully they prove us wrong. Because at some point, you look at all the contenders over the last 2 decades, really, they've been able to sustain their success and supplement their established talent with youthful energy, with young guys on cheap rookie contracts that can come in and contribute. You look around the league right now at the playoff teams, a lot of them have guys that they drafted that they have developed, and you kind of need that moving forward. But I want to tell you guys a little bit about Circle K. Circle K is America's thirst stop. New free membership program. Save 25 cents per gallon on your first 5 fill-ups, and you can save 3 cents per gallon every day with the Circle K Inner Circle. Thirst, meet your match. Enjoy your member-exclusive beverage deal. Inner Circle members like you can get any size Polar Pop or Froster for just 69 cents now through September 3rd. You can find it in the app under Inner Circle and offers. Join Inner Circle for free by downloading the Circle K app today. Terms and conditions apply at participating locations. Visit CircleK.com for details. I'm very lucky where I live. There are actually 2 Circle Ks just down the street from me, so I am a regular there. I fill up there pretty much every time I have to fill up the tank. And this program is legit because it does get you 3 cents off per gallon every time you fill up there. So definitely something to take advantage of. Another thing you're going to want to take advantage of is Desert Financial Credit Union. For more than 84 years, Desert Financial has been Arizona's largest, most trusted local credit union, dedicated to creating exceptional experiences by giving back to the community and providing financial solutions that make lives better. The Desert Financial team are financial experts who are committed to their members and the community, offering financial solutions tailored to help real people achieve their financial goals and dreams. Look to Desert Financial for checking and savings accounts, mortgages, loans, credit cards, investment options, and more. Join a credit union that is committed to giving back to the community and sharing success with members. So when you open a free checking account online, you'll get $200 in bonuses. You can get started by visiting desertfinancial.com/200. All right, Steven. So we talked a little bit about the state of the starting lineup and what went wrong in the series. Now we're going to figure out, what are we changing? Are we changing things through trade? Are we changing things in-house? What are we doing differently next year? Because I think there is something to be said for having your core intact, having most of your guys coming back next season and building on that, because we always talked about the continuity disadvantage the Suns would be at. But we also acknowledge that you cannot just run it back with everybody and expect that improved chemistry is suddenly going to instill fight in these guys, instill faith in what they were doing on both ends. Let's start with the coaching thing, and then we can talk about the roster. I'm not going to put you on the spot and ask you, should they fire Frank Vogel? Because I hate that question. Like, first of all, it's not our decision. Second of all, I hate talking about somebody else's job because I would hate for somebody out there to be talking about mine. So it just feels gross. But if the Suns were to fire Frank Vogel, would you understand, or would it feel kind of like he was scapegoated for the team's problems? Or is it kind of that middle ground between them both?
No middle ground for me. If he were to be fired, I would feel like they would be doing a disservice to him. Because again, you bring in a coach that's well-renowned across the league rather, to be defensive minded in his tendencies and his approach and his general preparedness. But you didn't provide him with almost even a lick of defense. Like, I mean, naturally, eventually they got Royce O'Neal, but for the better part of quite literally the entire season, the team's best defender was Kevin Durant. Now that speaks volumes to Kevin Durant, even at 35 years old, being able to perform at an all defense caliber level, in my personal opinion, and especially even just taking the entire defense and saying, put me at the 5 and let's work. Let's switch. Let me be the anchor. All of this stuff at 35 again. Also with the scoring demands that he has, that's too much to task a 35-year-old with. Yeah, you have to supply your coach with the type of pieces that he needs to be successful. You can't just throw any coach into a pot and say, go make it happen. Even, Phil Jackson, arguably one of the best coaches of all time, is not going to be able to do the things that he wanted to do if he did not have Scottie Pippen.
Right.
So like if we're talking about all of these things or all these expectations and Frank Vogel not doing this, that, and the third, you have to always ask yourself if he had the requisite pieces to be successful for the things that we know he does well. Naturally, by the same measure, he also never had somebody on the perimeter to navigate screens, to just generally initiate defense from the point guard position at the point of attack. You throw Bradley Beal in there, you throw Grayson Allen on everybody under the sun that's not a center this season. That's just not sustainable. It might work in stretches. It might work for a couple weeks or a month, but it's not going to work to the extent that you need that coach to be successful with. So I feel like they would be doing him an extreme disservice if they fired him, and they would be using him as a scapegoat of all of the problems that they had this season. So that's where I'm at with that. I'm 10 toes down on that, and I hope to see Frank back next season with a restacked deck of cards that are a little bit more inclined to facilitate to his system and his principles the way that he desires for them to be.
Yeah, no, I think I agree with you. And you brought up a lot of good points in terms of like you were expecting this defensive juggernaut because of Frank Vogel's reputation, but you didn't give him the pieces. Like, sure, there were defensive minded players like KBD and Josh Okogie, but because they couldn't stay on the floor offensively, like it doesn't matter. Like you still didn't give him the pieces he needed in that way. You rolled out Portland's starting and backup center rotation and expected him to put together some rim protecting team. That's just not going to cut it. So I do think he would be scapegoated. I do understand, like if they fired him, I think he would be scapegoated for problems that went far beyond him. I do think there is something to the idea that players might view him as like a nice guy, but maybe not the guy to get them across or to hold stars accountable. And if that is the case, and if he's lost the faith of the main guys in the locker room, then yeah, that's a difficult thing to overcome. But I think from an X's and O's standpoint, from a, creating a defense based on the pieces he was given, it'd be kind of unfair to be like, well, we were an above average defense with below average defenders. Like, sorry, you're out. That would be tough. But let's talk about the roster itself. We did touch a little bit on the starting lineup. What needs to change with this roster over the summer, bearing in mind that they have limited avenues to do that, but what are kind of the biggest needs? What needs to change over the summer?
Yeah, I think they have enough offense between Bradley Beal, Devin Booker, Kevin Durant. Mm-hmm. You're spending $120 million, big M's between those three players. Mm-hmm. Naturally, you have to add the type of shooting and spacing pieces that you need to keep them in space and keep them in positions to where they're not having to work as hard as they may have to if you don't have those pieces around them. Mm-hmm. Yes, but I think also with that, you have somebody like Eric Gordon that's still going to be under contract next season. And now, obviously, Eric Gordon, I think if you ask Eric himself, he would say he left a lot to be desired this season on the offensive side of the ball, with his shooting, with his just general shot creation off the dribble, things of that nature. I feel, and I said this coming into this season, that there is some redundancy between Grayson Allen and Eric Gordon. Now, naturally, if you do like we both are hoping for, and Grayson Allen can be a six-player type of guy in your role within everything you're doing, that means you're going to have two players that do a lot of similar things in that second unit or in just general reserve units. That's overlapping that I feel you can offboard to then insulate to things and check off more boxes on things that you need to address. Point of attack defense, rim protection, athleticism on the wing. Either one of those three things, I feel like Grayson Allen can net potentially two pieces if they're lower end on the contract spectrum to facilitate to everything that you're doing around the big three. Mm-hmm. Now, obviously, for anybody that knows me, anybody that's followed my work, first of all, gratitude. I appreciate you greatly for it. But you know how much I value Grayson Allen. Mm-hmm. Naturally, if anybody that covers the Suns or anybody that's like an actual member of the Suns values him that way, it might be even more value for him on the league spectrum. Other teams need shooting. I mean, you can look at a team like Orlando. If they had Grayson Allen in their first round series against the Cleveland Cavaliers, they would have won that series in 6. But the fact that they struggled to shoot off of the advantages that Franz Wagner and Paulo Banchero were able to create, that pigeonholed them, ultimately working against them. If they have even just one piece like that they're able to add to what they're doing, they look different. Now, naturally, obviously, I'm not saying the Suns should just go and try to trade specifically with the Magic, but I do think there's a natural partnership there. We need athleticism, defense, and youthfulness. You need shooting. How you doing? Let's talk about things. It could be, it's kind of, it could just be that type of relationship established in terms of establishing some type of attraction with the transaction. I think that Grayson Allen could bring a lot of things in for the Suns if they were to look to shop him. Now, I think naturally with him just signing the extension at the end of the regular season, he can't be traded until a certain point in the regular season going into the new season. But again, that's something that you have to explore down the line. And then I think the other biggest way would be just with that draft pick, like I mentioned as well.
Yeah, no, and I'm glad you brought up the Grayson and Orlando Magic thing, because I'm actually in the beginning stages of going through these different contracts that certain Suns players can be traded for. And I'm going through each player, each team in the league, trying to figure out deals that might make sense. And the Magic for Grayson, there are two. Like you mentioned, he cannot be traded until mid-October after signing that extension. There's a 6-month period there where he's not eligible to be traded. But in mid-October, salary-wise, Cole Anthony matches up and Wendell Carter Jr. matches up. Now, I don't know that the Magic would be willing to trade their starting center for just more shooting. That would have to be something where over the summer they somehow get an upgrade and Wendell Carter Jr. becomes superfluous and they're like, hey, we need shooting. Grayson was the best shooter in the league. Let's do this. Cole Anthony, I'm so sick of the Suns need a point guard conversation, but at least Cole Anthony would shut that up for a little bit in terms of having a backup point guard. He's more of a scoring guard again, but that nuance is normally lost. But those two contracts do line up. I'm sorry, Steve. I've just had it up to here with that conversation.
I know
it's going to come up so many times over the summer. But just spitballing a couple of ideas there. And I, like you, I don't think they should just trade Grayson or to bring in a point guard. Like, if you're trading Grayson, it is to cut down on the redundancy on your roster, and it is to address a real position of need, like the center spot for me. But like, to your point, Grayson is back next season. Eric Gordon has that player option, which maybe he opts out and takes a deal elsewhere. But like, his value is going to be vet minimum no matter what after the season that he had. Maybe he's disenfranchised enough with the offense, because he was pretty vocal all season about like, we need to be scoring 130 points a game. Like, anything less than that, we're not reaching our potential. He was pretty vocal early in the season when he only got like 2 or 3 shots in a game about how the ball wasn't moving. And he was right, to be fair. Like, he was right about a lot of it. But maybe he's so disenfranchised that he decides to go somewhere else. I think he was coming here expecting big things and was pretty disappointed. But at the end of the day, a 3-point whatever million player option, you might take that rather than testing the market and not getting anything. So if they are both back, you're right. You have two guys who don't quite have the skill set to be your backup point guard. They both occupy the same kind of position as undersized two guards, and you don't really want to play them together because, especially with the year that EG had, you're doing your bench a disservice at that point, I think. So that is something to keep an eye on. Anything else in terms of looking at what needs to change? I think we've both mentioned the center spots. They need to find upgrades in that way. I do think adding a backup ball handler for when they stagger the big three would be helpful, but is there anything else that we haven't touched on that you feel like is a need or something that needs to change with the roster?
Yeah, I think you mentioned upgrading the center position. I think in my just kind of looking at how I would prioritize things, I would try to get the wing first, that wing piece that's more defensive minded and athletic. Looking in the mold of a Toumani Camara type of player that can shoot. But also I think secondary to that would be rim protection and just general athleticism at the center position. Add a little bit more scheme versatility, add that vertical spacing. And if you can sprinkle in at least half of the playmaking that Nurkic was able to execute, dribble handoffs, occasional backdoor pass. I think the type of player I'm literally describing is Clint Capella.
Yeah.
Now, obviously, again, he's not without his flaws. No center is without flaws unless you're talking about Nikola Jokic.
Mm-hmm.
A 3-time MVP now, by the way. I'm just like to throw that out there. Unless you're talking about somebody like him, you know, every player you're looking to bring in that you can actually afford is going to come with some level of flaws. It's just a matter of which flaws are louder to your process than others. And I think if they can find them a Capella type of center, whether that be via Nurkic and the pick being used together to make something happen, or you know elsewhere, I think you have to press that button. And I just think it's just a non-negotiable for them this upcoming offseason. And if they can do that, I think they optimize and maybe even potentially extend the window that this big three has, which is naturally everything that you're building around and investing in. And if you don't, I think you're going to see a lot of the uneven results that they saw in waning moments over the course of this past season.
Not to toss a nuke on the chat, but like I mentioned, I have been putting together trade scenarios for everybody, and that includes members of the big three. So, Steven, I'm just going to drop this bomb and walk away real quick.
Let's talk about it.
Get your thought. Kevin Durant for Clint Capella, DeAndre Hunter, and Jalen Johnson. Now, I don't think you are getting I think for both sides, you're kind of looking at that and you're going, it kind of makes sense, but I don't know about that because I'm full. Before any of the KD people in the chat get on me, I am fully on board the train of keep KD, work it out. You have too much talent here to just blow it up for the sake of blowing it up. But you do get your center upgrade in Clint Capella, a guy who can defend, who can stay on the floor, who can set screens, who can provide rim pressure as a good finisher around the basket. You do get your wing defender in DeAndre Hunter, who is young. That's young is good. And you get Jalen Johnson, who is a guy that the Hawks are probably pretty high on and might be the deal breaker, honestly, from their end. But he adds more size. He has upside. He's young. He's athletic. There are all these different things. I struggle with this one. Salary-wise, it does work. And that's the thing. Like Clint Capella, you're not going to be able to trade for him in a one-for-one deal because Nurkic's contract is not as high as Clint Capella's. So there's no deal you can do for Clint Capella that does not involve a member of the big three. Thoughts on the grenade that I just put into your life?
Well, for our beloved listeners, welcome to the life of a general manager.
Yeah.
Quite literally on a daily basis, you're trying to figure out any way. You have to exhaust all possibilities in terms of upgrading your roster. And actually, you have to have these difficult conversations. And the difference between them and us, we're just doing it over the microphone for the entertainment purposes and information purposes of the listeners.
Yes.
They're doing it, and they have actual literal human beings that are all-time greats in the case of Kevin Durant that you have to, potentially have a conversation like this with. That makes all of this just that much tougher when you're integrating the human element of things. Nonetheless, from my podcast and microphone and my comfortable seat in my room, I would not do that trade just because I think naturally you check off multiple boxes with Jalen Johnson and DeAndre Hunter, and obviously with Clint Capella. My thing is with that trade, you then open up a portal because now the demands on offense for Devin Booker and Bradley Beal spike up. It makes things navigation-wise a lot tougher. And I think some of the redundancy that comes with having Bradley Beal and Devin Booker is mitigated because of the presence of Kevin Durant and how he positions them within the offensive process, regardless of who the coach is going to be. Now you take him out of the picture, I think that opens up some other things that the Suns don't have to worry about as much because he is under contract with them. But I do like I love this trade as a template because this is the type of this is the type of things that you have to cross off just in terms of looking at things. I like that a lot. I like it, but I would if I was James Jones, a lot of things would be different. That's neither here nor there. But I would say no to this particular trade because of the things that I mentioned. I like that. I like the creativity on your end though with that one. That's a really clever one. It makes you think for sure.
Yeah, it's going to be interesting because a lot of these trades that I'm coming up with for each of these guys, particularly with Kevin Durant, it's either straight up for a star, which I don't think makes a lot of sense depending on the star. And then there's a lot of like trades like this where you're addressing multiple positions, but maybe not getting full value, and probably not going to be able to replicate a lot of what KD does. And like you said, a lot of the pressure that he alleviates offensively for both Book and Beal. But it is going to be interesting this summer because KD is eligible for a contract extension. I don't think if you're the Suns, you want to do that at all, just because you look at the age, like at some point it's going to start to trail off. And if they don't want to offer him that extension, how does Kevin Durant feel about that? That could come with a whole bag of questions, but we'll get to that on a different show. That's its own whole segment. But I do want to remind you guys that this episode of Take That for Data, part of the PHNX Suns podcast, is brought to you by Illegal Pete's. It's patio season now. It's getting a little bit hot, but there are the misters, and patio season means patio beers. Illegal Pete's Margarita is the strongest in Arizona, so that is a good way to cool down in this summer heat out here. They've got irresistible drinks and mouth-watering food that will fill all of your heart's desires. They've got bowls, they've got tacos, salads, burritos, nachos, anything that you could want. They've also got a full bar with custom cocktails and beers in addition to that margarita. And their piping hot queso is pretty good, if I do say so myself. So Illegal Pete's is here to bring you a win with their legendary soundcheck deal. Bring in your ticket stub from any ticketed event and get a draft beer or house margarita for a penny. Illegal Pete's wants to celebrate with you, whether it's a pregame or a postgame party. They got you covered on all your game day needs. Must purchase an adult entree to redeem Illegal Pete's soundcheck deal. Illegal Pete's, your go-to spot for burritos, buddies, and beer. And to continue the alliteration here, hey there, Beach Boys. Are you ready to soak up those summer vibes and unveil your ultimate beach bod? Well, you're in luck because our friends over at Manscaped have you covered from head to toe with the Performance Package 5.0 Ultra. This is your ultimate all-in-one grooming kit set to have you looking and feeling your best in the summer sun. Trust Manscaped and unlock the confidence you need to turn heads this season. Join the 10 million men worldwide who trust manscaped.com for 20% off and free shipping with the code PHNX20. Let's make this summer your smoothest one yet. There's a lot to like about Manscaped. Their updated Lawnmower 5.0 Ultra Groin and Body Hair Trimmer helps you get that summer makeover. It is waterproof and designed for splashy pool parties and beach hangouts. They've also got the Weed Whacker 2.0 ear and nose hair trimmer. It's especially useful for me. I got to be honest. If I'm in front of Suns players and they're sitting in a chair in the locker room, I don't want them looking up at a nose full of hair. So it's a good thing to keep your nose hair trimmed in that way. They've also got the Magic Mat disposable shaving mats, got your back and front and anything else that needs grooming. Get 20% off and free shipping with the code PHNX20 at manscaped.com. That's 20% off plus free shipping with the code PHNX20 at manscaped.com. The summer sun is here to stay, so trust Manscaped to keep your pubes at bay. All right, let's talk about the big three. We've kind of touched on a lot of these things, a lot of areas where they can improve the roster. How do you optimize this particular big three? A lot of people are going to ask about the point guard thing. A lot of people are going to ask about the balance between Booker and Bradley Beal, the aggression there, who needs to be handling the ball, all these other things. But Steven, in your mind, how do you take these three and optimize them moving forward?
I think you need to get them some road runners, some track stars, some players that are going to do things that are conducive to an up-tempo environment, and some pieces that can thrive in that environment independent of them, but also thrive in tandem with them as well. And I think we kind of talked about it a little bit. It's a little redundant at this point, but if you have a point of attack defender that has some athleticism to them, they're going to cause a little bit more chaos defensively. Spending a little bit more time in transition for either one of those big three or all three together is going to net them opportunities at the highest of green shot quality. It's going to allow them for opportunities to, for example, if you're looking at someone that's a rim runner in transition, that's going to create opportunities for three-point shots. It's going to allow for opportunities at easy opportunities at baskets, whether that be them playing off of the advantages created from the big three or setting the advantages themselves off of the athleticism that they're providing. And just a general, it's a level of unpredictability that comes when you play with that style, or if you have players that facilitate to that style of play. I think that those are the type of things that they need to add around. Obviously, the shooting is a non-negotiable requisite, but I think in addition to that, having that athleticism that can cause a little bit more chaos on defense maybe even spell them from some of the matchups that they might have to take on over the course of 48 minutes over the regular season, or especially on the playoff stage. I think you start getting to those depths within your natural rotation for a playoff stage. I think that's where you start to optimize all three of those players.
Yeah, no, I agree. I think you need some 3-and-D wings. You need some upgrades at that center spot, guys that can set good, sturdy screens like Nurk did, that can hold down the boards, but most importantly, can stay on the floor defensively. But the wing thing looms large to me because you can't have another season where Kevin Durant is your wing stopper. Like that, you want to utilize him as a secondary wing protector or a guy who can help over and take on those secondary assignments, but you don't want to be tasking him with stopping, everyone from LeBron James to Domantas Sabonis when you have to go small. Like it puts him in a really tough position, puts a lot of strain on him defensively when you're already asking him to do a lot offensively. I really want a backup ball handler as well, just to have somebody that when you take Book or Beal out of the game, you have somebody that's going to help get some of these second unit guys in their spots, because I think we saw it at times this season. We saw flashes where Point Beal looked good, where Point Book looked good, but they were never able to kind of put it all together at the same time, it felt like. And that was the disappointing thing, was coming into the season, Frank Vogel talking about we're going to have this multiple ball handler attack. And you can envision that. You can envision how each one of those three puts pressure on defenses when the ball is in their hands, how they can all navigate pick and rolls or that sort of thing, and they can all play off the ball. So you thought that interchangeability would be really good for them, but it just didn't materialize in the way that we want. So I do think a lot of this is going to be just internal improvements and tweaks to the offensive system to make sure that each of these guys are getting the ball in spots where they're able to thrive and comfortable, building that familiarity to work out of those actions and out of those spots. But also just like making it easier for your second unit by having someone who can orchestrate a little bit more, I think would help in that way. Is there anything that we're missing? I think it's kind of funny. What do the Suns need? Better centers, better wings, better ball handler, everything. It's fine.
I think we checked off all those boxes, and I'll just kind of add to what you mentioned with not wanting to have to see Kevin Durant guarding insert elite level wing here because the Suns don't have anybody else to match up stature wise with that player.
Mm-hmm.
I would also rather not see, especially looking at things in the early part of the season, Grayson Allen be a player that's tasked with guarding LeBron James for the first 36 minutes of a game in the in-season tournament, or, like any type of scenario like that where you got Grayson Allen trying to guard somebody like DeMar DeRozan at times. Literally Jimmy Butler, name any other type of wing that you wouldn't want to see Kevin Durant have to guard for an entire game. You also don't want to be pigeonholed and stuck in a position where you have to put Grayson Allen or Eric Gordon, or even more extreme, Devin Booker or Bradley Beal on those type of players. If a switch happens, okay, you got to roll with the punches. But just at the onset, we're starting the game, the jump ball just went up, Lakers win the tip off, LeBron James initiating offense, it's Grayson Allen guarding. That's not. And you want to set a tone, like that's not something that's going to be conducive to, again, the things that Frank Vogel, if he's the coach, or any other coach rather, is going to want to be trying to do with the team that they're going to be inheriting. So that's just kind of where I'm at with it. I'm very much in alignment with you. I don't think there's anything else we can speak to in terms of adding around the big three. I think unless we literally went across the league and did the other 29 teams, okay, this player would look good, that player would look good. I feel like we checked all of those boxes off. This is very, very, very thorough, detailed conversation. And again, episode 7, we still very much in lockstep with each other as well.
Yep. And you wouldn't expect anything less from an episode of Take That for Data, because that's what we're here for. We're here to be as thorough as hell. So.
Indeed. And I also like to add, I hope that whatever happens with Frank Vogel, Fizdale stays, because if he doesn't, we might have to rename the podcast, my guy.
Oh man, I didn't even think of that. Damn, we might have to rebrand. I hope we're not in for a rebrand. But that's going to do it for this episode of the Take That for Data podcast, a special episode of the PHNX Suns pod. You can follow the pod on Twitter at PHNX _Suns. You can follow me on Twitter at Gerald Bourguet, and you can follow Steven on Twitter at StayTrueS.3. And make sure to follow his YouTube and everything that he does, because Steven does some really great work. Again, we are very lucky to be able to do this show with Steven once every 2 weeks and get to tap into his basketball mind. So give this guy a follow. If there's anyone on Suns Twitter who deserves more follows, it is Steven. That's going to do it for this episode. Until next time, take that for data.
We all silly like the mayor.